What's going on, guys? Welcome back to the Rantin Review Entertainment. I am here in my workshop studio and I am full of dust. And hopefully it's not getting on the camera, but I've been doing some woodworking today. But I did want to rush and get this out pretty soon because it's Spider-Man No Way Home. And I wanted to give my spoiler-free review before it got too late or too far into the weekend. So before we get into that, I would appreciate it, I should say, if you guys would hit the like button, the subscribe button, and the notification bell down below. And yeah, leave a comment if you like. Let me know what you guys think about this video, what you think about Spider-Man, and where you think the MCU is going. But now let me get into my spoiler-free part of my Spider-Man No Way Home review. So you should know this by now if you're watching this video, but the premise of this movie is that right after the end results of Spider-Man No Way Home, or Spider-Man Homecoming, or whatever the last one, Spider-Man MCU Part 2, that Mysterio outed and basically doxed Peter Parker. So the entire world knew that Spider-Man was Peter Parker, and Peter Parker was Spider-Man. And now he has to deal with that shiznit. Big part of him dealing with this whole thing is the fact that now MJ is known by everybody as being Peter Parker's girlfriend. And yeah, pretty much everybody in his life, Happy, Aunt May, everybody is outed, and it turns into a big problem. It turns into a big problem for him and his friends to get into college. It turns into a big problem for them being able to live where they are. They have to go move to Happy's apartment because they've got media and police and federal agents hounding them all over the place about what happened with the Mysterio thing. And this leads to Peter Parker eventually wanting to go to Doctor Strange, as we saw in the trailer, to get him to wipe everybody's memory clean of him being Peter Parker being Spider-Man. And then that turns into a big mess when Parker continues to try to change his spell mid-casting, which makes a big mess. This big mess results in us getting, and I love the way they did this, everybody who knew that Spider-Man was Peter Parker was supposed to be affected, but what it actually wound up doing was drawing in people who knew that Spider-Man was Peter Parker from other universes, and that included the Sony universe. So we got William Defoe back as Green Goblin, we got Jamie Foxx back as Electro, we've got obviously Doc and Sandman and Lizard, whatever, and they're all coming into this movie, and they're all wreaking havoc because they're being pulled into this dimension, but they're also a bit disoriented because the Peter Parker that they're going after does not look like the Peter Parker that they know, of course, those being the Andrew Garfield Peter Parker from the Amazing Spider-Man movies, and of course Tobey Maguire from the original Sam Raimi Spider-Man movies. So as Parker and his friends trying to figure out how to get these villains under control, and he has some conflicts with Doctor Strange about how to deal with the situation. Doctor Strange is a little bit more scorched earth with his method, whereas Peter Parker, given the fact that his Aunt May is also a person who helps people who have problems, he wants to go on a route of trying to help these people and solve their issues because he'd rather not have the scorched earth method that Doctor Strange wants to have, which, you know, some people argue about that. That's a moral argument that's brought up in this story that I find to be very interesting, and it's not the only thing I find interesting about this film. They do ask a lot of questions that we have asked from over the 20 years now that we've had Spider movies about, you know, a lot of these villains wound up dying. You know, Doc Ock died. Of course, in the first Spider-Man Sam Raimi movie, you know, William Defoe's character, the Green Goblin, dies by being impaled by his own glider. A lot of these characters perished, and the question is, did they all have to perish? Because that's something that some people have brought up over the years, and this movie addresses that. This movie also addresses the consequences of being a friend of Peter Parker and what he has to do. And there's a lot of subtext to this going on that I really appreciated, because the movie moves at a very good clip. Even though it's almost a 2.5-hour movie, it moves pretty fast. It does drag a little bit here and there, but they cover a lot in this 2.5 hours. My main criticism of the movie, though, is so much in the disjointed tone of the first 30 minutes of it, where they're moving very fast to a lot of plot points, wrapping up what happened in the Far From Home movie. That's what it was called, Far From Home movie, and dealing with the fallout from that, at the same time setting up what the problem's going to be in this movie, and they do it very fast. There's this weird thing about Happy and Aunt May and their relationship and everything else, and Ned has some he's kind of there at the first part, but he becomes a much more important part, and we find out some interesting things about his backstory throughout the film, and of course MJ and Peter's relationship, which starts out they're the only part that throughout the entire course of the movie seems to be solid. But again, that first 30 minutes was a little shaky, but once you get into the part where you start seeing Doc Ock and Green Goblin and a lot of the other villains from the other Sony Spider-Man movies showing up, then things get a lot more interesting, and then they keep upping the ante, and upping the ante, and upping the ante, and upping the ante as the movie progresses. So since you see Spider-Man No Way Home, well, if you are a big Marvel Cinematic Universe fan, that's a no-brainer. You have to see this movie. I think it's, of the 3 films that they've released this year, Shang-Chi and Black Widow being the other 2, this is the most important one. I think it's the best of the ones they released this year. I was not a big fan of Black Widow, and I was kind of lukewarm on Shang-Chi, despite apparently everybody else thinking it was the greatest thing since sliced bread. I thought it was average. Had some good points to it. But this one is a big roller coaster ride. This does change a lot of things. There's a lot of momentum. It doesn't feel like I'm watching something I've seen before, just with a different character in it, or something that I should have seen a long time ago in the case of the Black Widow movie that's kind of a throwback to Phase 1 Marvel movies. This feels like a definitive Phase 4. We've done all this stuff already. Now we're moving forward, and we're setting up new things, and we're resetting some things so we can do better stories in the future with some of these characters. William Defoe and Jamie Foxx absolutely steal the movie for me. Jamie Foxx he's in there for what he needs to be. This is a much better version of Electro. Doc Ock, I felt was great, was good in his role. I like the kind of tweener thing that he got going. He wasn't quite a villain, he wasn't quite a hero. He kind of tweened between the two. We kind of saw where some of his stuff was going very early on in the film. Him being one of the more sympathetic characters or sympathetic villains from the original Spider-Man trilogy. But those two, and Defoe is awesome. I mean, he picked right up like he had never left this role, and he only played it once. That's the crazy thing about it. Outside of some voiceovers and some of the sequels, but he had that one time that he played Green Goblin 20 years ago, and he's able to pick it right back up, Peter, and get Spider-Man where Spider-Man needs to be. Defoe is he's so suited for this, and a lot of people made the comment. It's kind of a cruel comment to comment the fact that he really doesn't need the mask, and the mask does disappear throughout the course of the movie. You've seen that in the trailers, but he doesn't need the mask. His face is just as interesting. I'm going to be nice about it because I think some people have said some really cruel things about him, but he has an interesting face that fits the Green Goblin character, and he didn't even need the mask. Even in the first movie 20 years ago, when he would do his little facial expressions, he didn't need the costume. He looked like the Green Goblin just naturally. But that was some good stuff. Now, I'm not going to get into spoilers in this video. I'm going to do a spoilers video later on after more people have had a chance to see the movie. But there's a lot to cover, a lot of Easter eggs, a lot of ramifications for future Marvel Cinematic Universe movies. If you're a casual fan, you can watch this movie and enjoy it. There's going to be some parts about it you're going to probably be lost in if you haven't seen some of the MCU, and if you haven't seen any of the MCU and you haven't seen any of the other 5 Spider-Man films from Sony, there are parts of this movie where you're going to be lost. You're not going to get certain things. There are going to be certain characters that show up that everybody else is going to be cheering for, and you're going to be like, huh, who's that? That is kind of par for the course for when you're in the 13th year of a franchise, and really in the 20th year, if you think of the entire Spider-Man franchise in Sony, there's going to be those moments for people who haven't seen the prior films. So I would suggest you go watch at least the first 5 Spider-Man films and the Spider-Man No Way Home or Homecoming and all the MCU Spider-Man films to kind of get a better grasp on some of the things that are going to come up in this film that you might not have the context to understand. The only people I can see not liking this movie are people who are probably way too overly critical about this stuff. I mean, again, with any kind of fantasy, sci-fi, special effect, superhero movie, if you put too much thought into it as trying to make everything work, it's just too big a thing for everything to make sense. I mean, our real world doesn't make sense when you take it all into context. So a fictional world has less of a chance for everything to make sense, every single detail. So if you're getting to every single detail, there are some things in this movie that kind of don't make any sense, why characters do certain things. But you have to go along for the ride because that's what this is. It is a roller coaster ride. It does, as I mentioned in a preview video I did earlier in the week about the early reviews of this, there are some pretty hard-hitting emotional pieces to this. And I think they'll hit most people, even if you just know this movie, some of the stuff that happens in this film is pretty heart-wrenching and pretty sad. And I like it. There's some things about tropes that I want to talk about in the spoiler review, but we're going to have to save it for that. So overall, I do recommend you guys checking out Spider-Man No Way Home. I would probably do it as soon as possible so you don't, because there's a bunch of stuff that can get spoiled in this movie. So do it as soon as possible, or stay off the internet, or stay off of social media if you possibly can. But it's a great ride. Like I said, it's the best of the MCU movies they've had this year. I think it's the best one they've had since Endgame. So I definitely give it a thumbs up and definitely think you should go see it. But I want to know what you guys think about it. Those of you who haven't seen it yet, what are you most looking forward to? Those of you who have seen it, no spoilers, please, in the comment box below. But do leave your thoughts, general thoughts on the film, and where do you think the MCU may be going from here. I will be doing, again, my spoiler video later this weekend, as well as a video about the one mid-credit scene and what you would really call a post-credit trailer. Actually, it was after the credits rolled, and you should stay to see it because it's pretty good. But I will talk about that later. Thank you guys for checking out this video, and I will see you guys again here for more news, rumors, and reviews on the Rantin Review Entertainment. Have a good day.